Thank you everyone for joining us today for our Black Child Development Institute Atlanta 2022 policy briefing. We're really excited to have you. We're grateful that you took the time to be a part of the civic process in Georgia and America. And we have a full day packed for you guys in a couple of hours. We're going to do a lot of talking around things that are important. So welcome to our event. And so now I want to take the time to introduce you to our leader, our president, Dr. Bisa Lewis, who is president of the Atlanta affiliate. Dr. Bisa.
Thank you, Dr. Daphne. I am so happy that you all are here for our policy briefing as we prepare for the 2023 Georgia legislative session. A couple of years ago, Dr. Daphne and I were meeting, as we often do, of course, and we were talking about how, us, including a lot of different organizations, we have these advocacy day at the Capitol. But at that point, legislation's already in play, they're voting, bills are becoming laws, and we wanted to get ahead of the game. And that's when the policy briefing was born. So every October, we look forward to having this policy briefing where we get a chance to talk about legislation ideas that we should be thinking about, what particular topics and issues are important to our stakeholders so that we can get ahead of the game before the Georgia legislative session gets started. And we can make sure we're reaching out to our legislators and letting them know what's important to young children and families. And of course, based on our mission specifically, that the Black children and families are not forgotten about and left out. So thank you all for being here for this listening session today. We're excited to hear from our panel. We look forward to welcoming our new fellows, our Lifted Voices fellows. And again, thank you for being here. And at the end, I'll get a chance to share how you can get involved, take action, and also attend some upcoming events. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Bisa. So we want to go over the agenda just so you kind of know what our plan is for today. So you heard from Dr. Bisa with the opening and our charge. We're going to go over a few laws that were enacted in 2022 and talk a little bit more about those things. And then we're going to have a very engaging panel discussion around what happens after the election, our essential priorities for Black children and families. Then Dr. Bisa will give our charge of what we are going to do next and our call to action. So now we want to know who's here. So if you guys could go into the chat and put your name and your title. So are you a family member? Are you a provider? Are you a teacher? Are you an elected official? We want to shout you out. So if you wouldn't mind to go ahead, everyone who's on this call, to go ahead in the chat and share your name and your title. However, you may have multiple titles, but go ahead and we will look to see our team to see who we are and who's here today with us. So we have Callan Wells, Senior Health Policy Manager at Gears, Angela Curtis, who's a teacher. Who else is here with us today? Makash is a teacher. Destiny, she's an undergraduate student and researcher. Wow, we like that. I think this is, I want to say Ms. Williams, I can pronounce your name, for the Council of Professional Development and a business development manager. Margaret McCall, who's on our board, is a professional development administrator. Latanga Cunningham, a provider. Deja McKenna from Health Empowers. This is program director. Ebony Fountain, community engagement associate. Oh, Karan Kalu from our national office is a program manager within BCDI. Bridget Willis, who's a family child care provider, as well as our board member. Ife Finch with Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. She's director of economic justice. Jocelyn Sturdivant, who's senior vice president at NBCDI. Thank you for the national team. Monique Jones, a graduate student and a fellow. Linda Davis with Justice ECE Professional Development. She's a trainer. Oh, Ms. Godley is a contractor with Children and Nature Network Health and Nature Fellow. Jenny Patterson from our national office. She's the national programs manager and policy team. Brittany Newton, who's a senior policy analyst with Voices for Children. Thank you all. And so as anyone new comes on, someone from the Atlanta affiliate will welcome you. Thank you guys for taking the time to join us, because you could have been someplace else. So now I'm going to pass it over to the next slide. We want to go viral today. So if you could tweet, post, and share on everything social, hashtag Black Children Count. We also have our board member, Debbie Hillman, who just joined us. Next slide. For those of you who are new to BCDI-Atlanta, we operate a lot of our work within 6 platforms. Our work is organized around public policy and Black Children Count. We do a significant amount of work in early care and education for programs that involve children from birth and even prenatally up to 3rd grade or 8 years old. A lot of health and wellness work that kind of intertwines in everything that we do to make sure our families are healthy and thriving. And then we also do family engagement, because we know families are essential to young children. It is the glue that holds everything together. So we really, really focus on the adults who are responding to the children. Of course, literacy. Without literacy, where will we be? And child welfare. So those are the platforms that we use with BCDI Atlanta. So now I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Natasha Thorne, who leads our work in Lifted Voices. She's our Lifted Voices faculty, and she's really our thought leader when it comes to DEI and all things Lifted Voices. Dr. Natasha?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Can you all still see the screen, the Lifted Voices Black Power Fit? Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, so I'm as Dr. Daphne said, I'm Natasha Thornton. I'm the lead faculty for the Lifted Voices program. The Lifted Voices program falls under the Public Policy and Early Education and Childcare platform for BCDI Atlanta. The Lifted Voices Fellowship is designed to establish a lifelong practice of inclusive leadership and commitment to social justice in professions serving young children. It pays homage to our national Negro anthem, which is a history lesson on the strength and foresight of Black activism. That song is a reminder and call for Black Americans individually and collectively to lift their voices in the fight for liberation. And that is core to how the Lifted Voices Fellowship was conceptualized. So the long-term goal of the Lifted Voices Fellowship is to develop organizational leaders and policy professionals throughout the state of Georgia who more closely reflect the racial and cultural backgrounds of young children being served in early care and education systems, specifically Black children. Because if we look at the landscape of leaders, there are not a lot of Black leaders advocating for the voices of Black children. So in this year's cohort, last year was our inaugural cohort, and so we now have fellows in our second cohort. The fellows are examining the funding context of early childhood education and will advocate for the development and implementation of policies that support equitable experiences for Black children and their families. And we are here today because we know that is important work. And so for our fellows, they participate in a variety of experiences to build their capacity and to advocate for racial equality. Fellows take the BCDI Atlanta's Lifted Voices course. We have a course where they learn about the historical context of advocacy from Black leaders, activists, and organizations. The fellows will develop their own personal stories as a tool for advocacy. They will examine their leadership practices and their current professional context to ensure and work toward more inclusive and equitable leadership, and they will also learn about the legislative context related to Black children and families in Georgia. Now, alongside all of that work, the fellows are developing an advocacy campaign where they will contact legislators to advocate for policies that ensure equitable implementation of the law for Black children and families. And so because this work aligns directly with the work of the policy briefing and the policy work of BCDI Atlanta, some of the fellows are here with us today to support the work of this briefing. And I will introduce the amazing cohort now. And so we have Angela Curtis as a 2022 fellow. She's a lead pre-K teacher. We have Monique Jones, who's a social services case manager. Makasha Lightfoot is a lead pre-K teacher. Nikia Mosley is a Head Start director, and Nicole Prater is an elementary school assistant principal. We also want to recognize Fund Georgia's Future. Lifted Voices Fellowship is supported by some funding from Fund Georgia's Future, which is a coalition of organizations and individuals advocating for fair and full funding of Georgia's public educational system. And so we've designed this Lifted Voices cohort to align with those goals and objectives to support Black children and families. And Daphne will share more about what the fellows will do today. Thank you. And I also want to recognize too, we also have Dr. Lee Johnson. He's the Vice President of Policy for BCDI-Atlanta. He's moderating today, and he came on early to engage with us before the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's get started with our work for today. So you'll see that our work will be divided into two major activities. First, we're going to go back to some laws that were enacted in the 22 legislative session of the Georgia Assembly. These laws that we're going to talk about today, we want you to frame those laws. These laws that were selected, you know, there were many things that were enacted in Georgia, but these laws that we selected to talk about today are laws that have potential prevention opportunities. These laws are very impactful for Black children and families. And we want you to think about these laws and what it means to implement it. What is the implications of our cultural perspective? What does it mean to operate these laws in the context of Blackness? As we talk about these laws and what happens in our conversations, we want to talk about a couple of things. Now the law is written, the next thing to happen is that policies around how the law will actually take place will have to be written. So we want you to think about policy implications for Black children and families and what could be early intervention or prevention. Funding. Think about equity in funding. Will there be enough funding directed so that every child in Georgia, every family in Georgia has the benefit of feeling the full impact of these laws? How can they benefit from these laws in a just type of way? After we have these conversations, which will be very interactive, we're going to use the information for our advocacy campaign. We would use it to go to the Capitol, and we're in front of anyone. If it's a state agency, if it's an elected official, if it's a foundation, we're going to use this information that you're going to give us today for advocacy. We also want to look to see how do we systematically align with what's going to happen in Georgia to make sure that our children are okay. So as we go through this conversation, we first will have an opportunity to learn more about each of these new laws that go in effect in Georgia. Then we'll have a time after each presentation to talk about it, to discuss it. What does it mean for us? And we want to hear your voice. Remember, lift your voice and have an opportunity so we can take copious notes around what you think about exactly what's going to happen in Georgia. So now I want to pass over to Nikia to talk about Protect Students First.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk about the divisive topics law. The divisive topic law prohibits discrimination based on race and includes complaint resolution policy for parents. This act prevents the use of reliance upon curricula or training programs which advocate for 9 delineated divisive concepts, including but not limited to the concept that one race is inherently superior to another race. School districts must respond to complaints and people who don't like the outcome and can appeal to the State Board of Education. If the board finds the school district is in the wrong, it could suspend some or all of its waivers from the state regulation. The 9 divisive topics are: one race is inherently superior to another race. The United States of America is fundamentally racist. An individual, by virtue of his or her race, is inherently or consciously racist or oppressive towards individuals or other race. An individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of his or her race. An individual moral character is inherently determined by his or her race. An individual solely by virtue of his or her race bears individual responsibility for actions committed in the past by other individuals or the same race. An individual solely by virtue of his or her race should feel anguish, guilt, or other form of psychological distress. Performance-based advancement for the recognition and appreciation of character traits such as hard work ethic are racist or have been advocated or by an individual of particular race to oppress individuals of another race, or any other form of race scapegoating or race stereotyping. As Lifted Voices Fellows, we are concerned that the intentional deletion of accurate history is an assault on Black children being taught well and a continual preparation of systemic racism. So let's talk about divisive concepts. What are your thoughts regarding the divisive concept law?
Thank you, Nakia. So this is your time to share. You can share via the chat, or you can unmute yourself to talk about this concept. And we want to hear your thoughts. And we just have some things there for you to resonate with you. So race in the classroom, accurate history, systematic racism. What does it mean for teacher training? The normalization of whiteness. What is an accurate curriculum now that we have this new law? Racial justice. What type of funding would we need with a law like this? What type of professional development do we need for teachers? Do we have qualified staff to teach these new concepts that are required by Georgia? How does this make you feel? We also have a Padlet that you can use to put your thoughts on as well. So Dr. Natasha has dropped the link in the chat. So if you don't want to speak up, you can add your thoughts to the Padlet and we will use that as a part of our conversation as well.
Daphne, this is Debbie Hillman.
Hey, Debbie.
And I would just say that one of the things that comes to mind for me is monitoring, because one of the things that we're going to have to do in light of this quote unquote law and the quote unquote integrity of this law is to monitor how it's being used. Because one of the things that has happened is that there are words like critical race theory that have been thrown out. There are words like, I don't want my child to feel bad. I don't want my child to feel guilty for something that someone else supposedly did. So as protectors of Black children and other children of color and families, we have to make sure that we are closely monitoring by attending those board meetings, by speaking up, by advocating on behalf of, by having the facts, so that just as someone's child may feel bad because of one thing, what about other children? And if we would just tell the truth, then we could eliminate a lot of the ills.
Thank you, Debbie. So true. So true. The purpose of social studies is to help students to be citizens. So how is this going to help our students? Go ahead. Who was speaking?
So I'm Roberta Gardner. I'm associate professor at Kennesaw State University, and I'm so glad to be here and to listen in and to contribute to the conversation. And one of the things that I want to say is that, and I put it in the chat as well as on the Padlet, that first aspect of the divisive concept law that talks about one race or ethnicity is inherently superior to another race or ethnicity, I feel like is really a generative point for our Black educators and Black parents to really get active on, because the way the standards are, the way the curriculum already is in the K through 12 spectrum, across the K through 12 spectrum, whiteness and you know, white aspects of our history are you know, portrayed as superior, right? So if you look at the standards, you'll see that there are so many folks in African American history who are left out. I work with students almost every day that have no idea who Crispus Attucks is or who he was, and they're teaching about the American Revolution. How can that be? Right. So I think that first aspect of the divisive concept law is a really great place, is a really generative place for our Black educators and parents to really say, okay, you put this law out here, let's call you on the carpet on it and start getting these standards changed so that whiteness is not centered in the way that it currently is.
Thank you so much. And who picked those 9 things? And why are those 9 things the final say so? What is how should we lift our voice around those 9 concepts?
And I just love the connection between Ms. Hillman's and Roberta's comments. Use our voices, as Ms. Hillman said. We need to go to these meetings. We need to engage in this policy work. We need to push the change. Use our voices, as Ms. Hillman said, around what Roberta just outlined, right? Who created this and why, and who is it censoring? And I think it's so important to, yes, this law is about protecting students first, and we know it's from the white dominant norm of protecting white students, because there's a belief that they have a right to comfort in the classroom, where our students have been suffering for so long for not knowing who Crispus Attucks are or who the Black excellence is in our history. And so also on the Black end, we can advocate, you know, for that. This is what we need in our curriculum for our children. We're protecting our children as well. And so I just love the connection of those 2 responses. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I just put a couple of links, put one link in the chat for the Penn Foundation. I saw where Kaylin Wells, you know, you mentioned looking at which books are read in the curriculum would be an interesting way to investigate. You're 100% right. And that link to the Penn Foundation really is a great resource, because it documents the groups who are really pushing for this legislation. There really are only about 4 or 5 groups regionally that have been impacting states all over the country. And one of the groups, I put the name in the chat too, is a group called Moms for Liberty. Okay. And it is a national group, but they have regional pods all over the country. And they have been affecting this change and really creating a lot of, you know, trouble around censoring books and surveilling the kinds of books that are in libraries, public libraries, as well as in schools. So anyway, I just put those resources there, and I hope they're helpful.
Thanks, Roberta. We need moms for justice. Moms
Yeah,
for equality. You know, we need Black Mamas Matter. You know,
right. I know.
to incite this, because this is changing our little young ones' mind, how they perceive their self-concept, their self-identity, right? So we have to make sure it's inclusive, it's responsive, and it's accurate.
And just an anecdote to that, just quickly, and I don't want to like get off what we're doing, but Roberta mentioned American Revolution. Last week, my son is in the 4th grade. He brought a homework assignment home where he had to talk about his experience if he was going to the Continental Convention, right? And we had to talk through this. And one of the questions was, who do you most admire in the Continental Convention? And, we talked about it. I said, I can admire, a slave owner. I can admire, and so he, in that work and of our discussion, he responded as a, through a Black lens. And he talked about it with his teacher, and his teacher, he was afraid he wasn't going to get full credit, but he got full credit. But that brought up a conversation in class about, and a going conversation about us being thoughtful about what we're putting in front of our children, because as mentioned from a few of y'all, it impacts children's lives. This was last week in my house, right?
Hi, everyone. This is Ife Finch-Floyd from the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. And one of the things that we are thinking about is about the narratives kind of that push some of these legislation. Let's be clear, it's anti-Black legislation, right? And like, what does that mean? And what it could mean for legislation coming down the pike in the future, and how to forestall any legislation that may be seen as helping and supporting Black children, Black families, right? So I think it's also important that we're keeping our mind, our eye on some of these larger narratives that are, really promoting anti-Blackness, and how our, as people who are supporting, advancing policy to support Black children, to support Black families, to support Black communities, offering a clear counter message that, Black people are whole, Black people have value, and Black people deserve to be educated and have the best education, and have safe homes. And, so we have to be thinking about those larger narratives as well, in addition to the policies that support those larger narratives, because a lot of times this is often just a narrative struggle, and then the policies kind of come from those narratives that are being perpetuated throughout our state and throughout our country.
This is Callan. If I could just jump in to echo Ife, because we're seeing this narrative come up around other policies as well. So if you all remember the big mental health bill last session, a number, one of these groups that are in, that pen.org link that Roberta put in, came to specifically speak out against social emotional learning, which they sort of positioned as a vehicle for critical race theory. And so we're seeing the narrative affecting policies outside of education, and the mobilizing that these groups can do, I think, they're really bringing a lot of parents to the Capitol, and they're mobilizing to really affect policy. And so I think it's behooves all of us to consider, how do we fight that, right? How do we create a narrative that is, in opposition to that, or, in a way that's, I don't know, hearable, I guess is the right, I don't know if that's the right word, but if that even is a word, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll just jump in, Kaylin. I love that you said that, because literally, I don't know if it was this morning or yesterday, I saw an image in the news of a parent. It was a white mother or white female holding a protest sign that had an X over SEL, right, over social emotional learning. And I just put in the link this of critical social emotional learning, right? Because I do also think that that's a space for organizations like this one to really jump in on and talk about what's not included in social emotional learning, right? Race has never really been a factor, and it only became a factor after several African-American parents and academics and educators started to complain about how surfacey it was. I published a paper along with a Latinx scholar, Latinx academic, who we were looking at how it impacted bilingual students and how it impacted Black students in ways that really didn't get to their needs, right? Really didn't address their needs. So I think that's a way that, okay, if you want to put an X through social emotional learning, let's talk about it, right? Let's jump in and talk about what's not covered when we're talking about even topics like enslavement, right? In the curriculum, how Black children have sat for years being misrecognized, the omissions, right? Where the conversation starts, how issues like segregation and Ruby Bridges is taught in first grade. Like, if you're gonna do it, like, let's do it, and let's do it in ways that, right, really help them to understand their context in that larger story. So thanks for bringing that up, Kayla.
Thank you, Roberta. So we want you to continue the conversation as you process this information. Be sure you can add information to the Padlet as well as to the chat, because we'll take all this information in and use it for our work on advocacy for children. So we're going to move on to our next law that we want to talk about that was enacted in 2022. And this is our recess law, and we're going to pass that over to Monique to talk about. I'm not sure, Monique, are you on mute?
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, all right. So the recess law mandates unstructured break time for students in kindergarten through grade 8. A brief summary of the law includes that scheduled daily recess for students in kindergarten in grades 1 through 5, and that local boards of education establish written policies allowing for recess. Beginning in 2022 to 2023 school year, each elementary school shall schedule recess for all students in kindergarten through 5th grade every school day. However, it shall not be required on any school day on which a student has physical education or structured activity time, or if reasonable circumstances impede such recess, such as inclement weather when no indoor space is available, assemblies or field trips exceeding their scheduled duration, conflicts occurring at the scheduled recess time over which the classroom teacher has no control, or emergencies, disasters, or acts of God. Each local board of education shall establish written policies allowing unstructured break time for students in kindergarten in grades 1 through 8. The policies shall include, but shall not be limited to, the following matters. School personnel will be authorized to decide the length, frequency, timing, and location of breaks, whether breaks can be withheld from students for disciplinary or academic reasons, and under what conditions. How to ensure break time is a safe experience for students, including the responsibility for supervision of students, and how to ensure that break time is scheduled so as to provide a support for academic learning. As elected fellows, Voices Fellows, we are concerned that the implementation of this law will perpetuate systematic racism due to the vagueness in language around the criteria for unstructured play, and due to funding inequities that are already apparent in schools, such as the disparity in the quality of playground equipment, the affordance of playscapes in affluent areas, and access to developmental appropriate for play structures for all children.
Thank you, Monique. So now let's hear from you. What are your thoughts around the recess law, framing it in equity, right? How can we make sure that there's equity in funding and resources dedicated to the recess law? And what policies need to be in place that are culturally responsive? Any initial thoughts? So as you guys are gathering your thoughts, some of you may be wondering, why is this law so important? Because we know that play is something that is becoming less prevalent among all children. But for some children, it really doesn't happen that often, in particular for Black children. Because of the environments that they live in, the social determinants of health, is it safe? Is it available? Is it thought of as being a priority? So all kids are not playing on a regular basis. So you may wonder why there's so much conflict and why kids can't resolve conflict in a regular way, a normal way. So we want to think about the whole child, right? So now there's recess there. How many kids will be playing every day? What will the middle school kids be doing? So it only requires that there's play every day for kindergarten through 5th grade. But what happens 6th, 7th, 8th grade? Will they have time to decompress? What does it look like when a child gets in trouble? Will they still get time to play? Will play be considered equal to reading and language? It's a part of the whole child. There's cognitive, social, and physical development of children. So what do you think about this new law? And what should we consider in our advocacy work?
There is extensive research. This is Charmaine Godley from Children Nature Network. There's extensive research on the Children in Nature Network website on the Research Digest about the importance of social and emotional development in going outdoors. We are sponsoring initiatives specifically in Atlanta, the Community Schoolyard Initiative, where we are transforming, and these are in predominantly low-income areas, where we are transforming typical playgrounds and schoolyards into incorporating nature-based and taking learning outside. So teachers are being trained how to do the same curriculum that they have inside the classroom as well as outside. So this is critical. The White House just funded this type of program and the importance of this. So this is up and coming.
Well, thank you, Ms. Godley. We'll definitely get back with you so we can get a list of those resources and share it when we share out our information. Great information. Anyone else?
I just dropped a link in, not to bring the goodness down, but this is a guy that does some work around what he calls the playground to prison pipeline. And he looks at the ways in which black males, unfortunately, their play is deemed dangerous. Their play is deemed as, a little bit rougher than everyone else's. And so the ways in which their play has been criminalized. And so I just think that's a part to, keeping the backdrop is just to pay attention to, like, not all play is regarded as quote good play because of biases and perspectives about Black males. And to some extent, I think there's research around Black females as well. So
thank you, Roberta.
That's an excellent point that you make. We just had a conversation about that in terms of the joint use agreements with the school systems and the community and looking at safety issues, because all of us know that everywhere that there is a basketball hoop, there has been a shooting, possibly a killing. And so you've got to think about what happens for this in the community as well as in the schools.
Thank you, Charmaine. And that's what we talk about, professional development. How can we support the school system in understanding play from ethological perspective? All boys engage in rough and tumble play. We know this to be true. It's how we frame it. What's the cultural perspective? How are we teaching kids how to play? You have to instruct kids. There are different phases and developmental stages of play. All of that needs to be done so that our kids can get to the place where they can resolve conflicts, right? So we have to start where our children are and support them as opposed to punishing them and seeing them as what they're doing with any other child who play cops and robbers. That happens from the time of my brother and probably your brothers and your grandparents. It happens frequently. That's a natural thing to happen. But when our children do it, we see it as a problem. So we really need to talk about and have honest conversations around play so that our kids can continue to play. Any more comments?
This is Debbie again. I think we also need to continue to raise the focus of imprisonment of our children. Our children are placed in prison long before that preschool to prison pipeline ever manifests. Because as you think about overstructuring of activities, not having any downtime. I can remember going in to observe in preschool classrooms and helping teachers understand that if you went into a restaurant and nobody was talking, you as an adult would probably leave. However, we are putting our children in situations where there's no downtime. There's no opportunity to enjoy. And situations like with the recess, removing that opportunity. Well, if I'm a little bit antsy, maybe what I need is to be able to just let my hair down and hang out. So we have to continue to advocate for that whole child's understanding of our children and their needs.
Thank you, Debbie. So Ife has a question. If all schools have what they need to do recess most days, and are there any structural barriers for some schools to carry this out? So anyone in the school system want to jump in? Do the kids have what they need to for recess, and are there structural barriers? So Ms. Golly, in your work with playgrounds, do you see there's a difference or disparity with playground equipment across different parts of the metro area?
It varies. There are, for example, there is a elementary school, Miles Elementary School, that's Cascade Skating Rink. Most people know where the Cascade Skating Rink is. And they actually have received funding from Trust for Public Land because schools are the largest landowners across the nation. And they have actually created an environment that looks like no place else in Atlanta. So I think it just depends on the school, it depends on the county, it depends on how much advocacy we do to lift this up. No schoolyards, there are 10 of them in APS and 1 in DeKalb County, and none of them look alike, but their focus is on the nature base. So it's not just traditional playground equipment, even though we are partnering with Kaboom and they have created their very first entire nature-based park in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I think this is a start. No, it's not all there, but you know, we can go nowhere but up at this point.
Thank you.
I think one other structural barrier, just real quick, because I know we got to move on to the next topic, is just our beliefs. And it goes back to what Ms. Hillman was talking about, us understanding child development and what children need, and us believing that children deserve play, right? I came from the school system. I was a teacher in the classroom for 8 years. And sometimes I would pull a play from my children for recess, right? Because they didn't follow directions, or they didn't behave the way I wanted them to behave, or they didn't get the answers right. We needed to do more instruction. So a part of the barriers is our beliefs and our understanding of what children need developmentally, and the belief that they need that time for rest, and not use it as a punishment, which we know is pervasive in a lot of the schools. We have to shift our beliefs.
Thank you. And Dr. B, so both of you guys both bringing great points around professional development and learning all about play. Thank you so much. So we're going to move on to our next topic. Remember to keep the conversation going on the Padlet or in the chat. And so now we want to talk more about the prevention of preschool suspension. This law was enacted, and we're going to pass this over to Angela.
Good afternoon. The preschool suspension law provides a multi-tier system of supports prior to suspension or expulsion for students in preschool through 3rd grade. A brief summary of this law includes that no student in public preschool through 3rd grade shall be expelled or suspended from school for more than 5 consecutive or cumulative days during a school year without first receiving a multi-tier system of support, such as response to intervention and wraparound services. Students will not be afforded this if the student possesses a weapon, illegal drugs, or other dangerous instruments, or such students' behaviors endanger the physical safety of other children or school personnel. As listed Voices Fellows, we are concerned that the vagueness of this law around will perpetuate systemic racism. For example, a shiny plastic knife is considered a toy in one child's hand and a weapon in another's. Another example, a child having a tantrum where the teacher is kicked is considered an accident for one child, and for another child, they are endangering others. We are also concerned about funding, increasing the numbers of counseling, mental health workers, and wraparound service will be needed in schools.
Thank you, Angela. So now let's hear from you. What are your thoughts around policy, cultural responsiveness, and funding for the preschool suspension, or the prevention of preschool suspension for young children? And I think, go ahead. Okay.
Okay, I was going to say, I think it really goes back to a couple of different things. One, in terms of having teachers and support services within the school system to understand where those behaviors are coming from. Many of those behaviors are not necessarily just labeled, should not be labeled just as bad behavior, but really many of our children, and I would say 100% of our children have been traumatized. And the trauma comes from just being African-American, people of color, just experiencing not only the trauma that they have to experience when they walk into a school and whether they're welcome or not, but also being able to unfortunately be exposed to their parents' trauma, their caregivers' traumas. So I think that when we look at the laws, we really have to, and I'm glad to see that the law includes the importance of mental health, the importance of teacher education, the importance of supporting families, because again, at the end of the day, the root of all of this is trauma. And we have to, if we address it as trauma, then we know that we don't penalize and we don't ostracize children because of the experiences they've had in their lives.
Thank you, Kathy. So true. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, this is
Go ahead.
Okay, this is Katrina. I work in the school system. Hi, Dr. Disa. I work in the school system, and one of the things that I see that is lacking is teachers that are qualified to actually deal with some of the children. Some of the teachers don't have the training to work with kids who have trauma, who have ADHD or even anything that's going on with their disability. And so some of the teachers easily get frustrated, they throw up their hands, or it's hard for them to talk to the parents on how they can get them help. And so I find that it's easy to suspend the child because we can't deal with them. Little Tyrone, he got issues and he's so defiant, he doesn't want to listen. And so we don't understand that it's the teachers sometimes that may need someone, and it's not their fault because they're teachers, right? They're teachers. And so we don't have those people who are specialized in the school system. I'm only there for a couple of hours a day and I get bombarded with children, and I can't meet all the 3 centers I have to go to if I'm only there for 2 hours. And so it really puts me at a standstill. And so I think we need more people in the school that's going to be there a little bit more full time for the kids.
Thank you, Dr. Katrina. I know, Marilyn, you had your hand raised. You want to go come on mute? I'm not sure if you're talking, Marilyn, or if you have to come off mute. Anybody else wants to add to this conversation?
I'll just, I will echo Kathy and Dr. Smith. Kathy and I are on the board of the Georgia Association for Infant Mental Health together. And so this is something that the two of us and some of our other colleagues think about quite a bit, about how do we create a system that can really support the mental health needs of young children and their caregivers and also educators. And that's something that I think, Dr. Smith, you absolutely hit the nail on the head there, because we know, especially when you think about the way that our early care and learning system is set up, educators are in the classroom all the time. They don't have a break. They don't have a time to go and talk to another adult. And so I think often about how you start to take things personally and you start to kind of feel this sense of overwhelm. And how do we create not just mental health supports for young children, but also how are we building our systems to give teachers a break and to give them time to talk to other adults. And you know, one of the things that Kathy does is infant and early childhood mental health consultation with early childhood educators, so that she can talk to early childhood educators about what children might be experiencing, how to kind of connect with them around their social emotional needs when, you know, because their behavior is communicating, it is a form of communication. And so we're really excited that Georgia has started to invest in infant and early childhood mental health consultation on a pilot level, but DeKalb has started to invest in infant and early childhood mental health consultation. So I can talk more about this anytime, but just echoing that this is, I just really appreciate that everyone really quickly kind of honed in on mental health as really important piece of this. And mental health consultation has a lot of evidence behind it, as well as kind of reflective practice and reflective supervision around helping educators address their own implicit bias that they bring into the classroom, which we know is another really big part of preschool suspension and expulsion.
Thank you, Callan. And we're always there for cultural responsiveness and partnering with the state as they move forward. So always look for us to have a voice. Maisa, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to add that as we look at all the different factors that can play into this, when we look at the data that approximately 50% of the children that are being suspended or expelled are Black children, it clearly points to racism. And it's not that it doesn't have some factors around, you know, mental health, teacher support, making sure that our teachers are trauma informed, but it is just another aspect of systemic racism, because if those other factors were the main factors, then the statistics would not state that 50% of the children are Black children, because then why isn't the same thing happening with other races or ethnicities? So I think we really have to just hone in and look at the fact that systemic racism is real, in that it affects all aspects of our life. And until we really focus and target in on that main piece, these other factors that of course would bring improvement will not deal with the issue, because 50% of Black children are being affected by this. And so the percentages are completely off based off of how much they are represented in preschool or in public education. I think we really just have to face the hard truth that is systemic racism that is primarily behind preschool suspension for Black children.
So true, Maisa, so true. Racism. Any other thoughts before we move on? I know we're becoming a little short on time. Continue the conversation with our Padlet and our chat, because we're saving both of them so we can have really robust information. So we're going to move on now. We're going to take a screen break for 5 minutes. So everybody stop what you're doing and look at your clock. Add 5 to it and be right back in 5 minutes. Thank you. So our 5 minutes are up. So if you're back in the room, you could give me a thumbs up or turn your camera on so we'll know who's here. We can get started with our the second and best part of our conversation. Okay, next slide. So now for this part of our work that we're going to do today, we will have a panel presentation where we get a chance to talk about after the election, right? So just your thoughts on after the election and what are our next steps. We want to talk about essential priorities for Black children and families. This work that this is going to help us to form our policy agenda for 2023. We want to hear from you to make sure that we have the right perspective. We want to make sure that you have a voice in what we do and what we focus on at BCDI. We really want to know how we're going to shape our advocacy day. Where should we put our energy on those things that matter for children? We want you to be a part of the conversation just as you have been before, to continue to talk, to continue to use the chat, and know at the end of this, even though our distinguished panel will give a lot of information, that you too will have a chance to ask questions. We want this to be interactive, to be at home, to be culturally responsive. It's a safe place because we need to know what's on your mind so we can get organized around it. We have to organize our efforts. And so to introduce our moderator for today, we're going to have Monique to come on and talk to us about Dr. Lee Johnson. Monique.
Okay, so our moderator this afternoon will be Dr. Lee Johnson III. He currently serves as the Vice President of Policy for the National Black Child Development Institute. As the Vice President of Policy, Dr. Johnson develops and leads NBCDI's preeminent advocacy and thought leadership initiatives, distinguished research and publications, and equity, advancing public policy and legislative agenda. Prior to his appointment at NBCDI, Dr. Johnson served in leadership roles where he built strategic partnerships focused on improving the quality of life for future generations, including director at the Alabama Department of Early Childhood Education, the first state director at First 5 Alabama, Alabama's Association for Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health, senior policy analyst for infant and early childhood mental health at 0 to 3, and as a former NBCDI policy fellow. Everyone, let's welcome Dr. Lee Johnson.
Thank you, Monique. Makasha, do you want to introduce the next panelist? Makasha, are you on mute?
I'm sorry. Pamela Perkins Corn is a co-conveyor for the EMS Incarceration Georgia Network. She is an advocacy consultant with a proven social action and public policy record in the areas of youth and criminal justice reform, child sexual exploitation and trafficking, education reform, and child health and welfare. Pamela is also the co-conveyor for the EMS Incarceration Georgia Network. This is a network of more than 400 individuals and organizations which was formed to provide a vision of justice for those affected by crime and incarceration and to effect positive change in the areas of youth and criminal justice. She also serves as the chair of the Family and Living Arrangement Subgroup of Georgia Department of Justice, Juvenile Justice Reentry Task Force. Ms. Pamela served for 10 years as the executive coordinator of the Child Advocacy nonprofit statewide expansion and education and juvenile justice initiatives in the schools to prison pipeline and implementing youth justice reform.
Thank you, Makasha. Next, Angela.
Dr. Roberta Gardner is an associate professor of reading and literacy education at Kennesaw State University. As a professor, Dr. Roberta Price Gardner's research explores Black childhood literacies, African-American children literacy, social, cultural context of literacy, particularly emotion and racialized trauma, and the policy implications of race, place, gender, and social class on literacy and literature. She serves on the executive committee of the National Council of Teachers of English and a co-director of NCTE's Professional DYADS and Culturally Relevant Teacher Program. Her work has appeared in journals such as Urban Education, Children's Literacy in Education, the Journal of Children Literacy, and Research in the Teaching of English and Language Arts.
Thank you, Angela. And Makasha, we couldn't quite hear you last time. You were breaking up, so you want to make sure you get close to the mic. I don't know if anybody else was having a hard time hearing. You can go ahead.
Marlon Tillman is the co-founder of Gwinnett Stop, which is Gwinnett Parent Coalition to Dismantle the School to Prison Pipeline. As a parent, community activist, and co-founder of Gwinnett Stop, Marilyn provides expertise on data research, information technology, and organization management. She currently serves as the Federal Strategic Co-Chair for the National Dignity in Schools campaign, the Education Civil Rights Alliance, Health School Environment Initiative, the Gwinnett County Public Schools GEMS Committee, which reviews the curriculum, and is an alumni of the Gwinnett Neighborhood Leadership Institute. Marilyn has previously served on the Gwinnett County Human Relations Commission and the Steering Committee for DSC. She is a past recipient of the ACLU of Georgia Civil Liberties Award for Community Activism. Maryland advocates at the local, state, and national level to impact education policy as it pertains to the school to prison pipeline.
Thank you, Makasha. And last but not least, Nakia.
Colin Wells currently serves as the Health Policy Manager, Georgia Early Education Alliance for Ready Students, GEARS. Callan Wells leads GEARS healthy policy work with a specific focus on growing the infant and early childhood mental health system of care in Georgia. Callan serves on the exploratory board in the Georgia Association of Infant and Mental Health, Birth to 5, and the Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health Task Force, convened by the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, where she chairs the Workforce Development Workforce. Additionally, she co-leads the Interagency Directors Team Prevention and Early Intervention Work Group. In 2019, Callan worked with state leaders in Georgia's House of Representatives on the Infant Toddler Social Emotional Health Study Committee. Before joining GEARS, Callan worked for Georgia Legal Services Program, where she ran a project helping rural Georgia families access health and other supports. Everyone welcome Callan.
Thank you. So now I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Johnson. Take us away.
Excellent, excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Really excited to be here. I want to say thank you for all of you for joining us today for BCDI's Public Policy Briefing Panel. I want to make sure that everybody can hear me. So can you show me by thumbs up that you can hear me? Everybody, okay, good. Excellent, awesome. As you've already heard, My name is Dr. Lee Johnson III, and I serve as the Vice President of Policy at the National Black Child Development Institute. I will be serving as a moderator for today's panel discussion and feel fortunate to be connecting with so many early care and education policy leaders. Now, I acknowledge that all of the attendees are automatically placed on mute. However, I would encourage you, should you have a question for our panelists, please share it in the chat and hopefully we can get to you as time permits. What is also wonderful to know is that this policy briefing is being recorded. I also want to give a special thanks to Drs. Thornton and Raybro and Lewis and the entire BCDI-Atlanta team for their leadership and genius in crafting today's policy briefing. Shouting out to Callan Wells, my good friend from Georgia. I also want to acknowledge all of you joining us today near and far, because I could see from looking at the chat, some of you joining us I've known for just a little while, and some I've known through correspondence for many years. So I'm mindful, given the election results, a variety of the feelings and as well as the variety of blessings which you bring to this moment, and I'm grateful to be with you. So one thing that I would like for us to think about before we dive into the questions, and I know that Dr. Thornton has given me a great deal of guidance around, structuring the questions and really bringing the full and vast expertise of this group to bear during this time together. But one question that I would say that NBCDI has explored in our recent work around the development of our strategic plan, and one that stands as an ongoing reflection question for us all, is what does a just and equitable future look like for Black children and families? We know Black children deserve to live in a world in which they are free to develop to their full potential, and that our world is at its best when we all collectively make every effort imaginable to sustain our society such that we experience the best that Black children have to offer at all times. And so we at NBCDI are excited about the future we aspire to see created, but also welcome the challenge to free our world of injustices and inequities that keep us from our new reality. And so as we're thinking through the questions that I'll be sharing, that we'll be reflecting on today, I also want us to also be thinking about this just and equitable future that we all are committed to creating for Black children and families. And so I want to pose the first question, opening it to the full panel. So I won't call on anyone in particular, but just opening up to the full panel first. But this first question, reflecting on yesterday's election results, what does this mean at the national, state, and or local level, in your view, for Black children and families? And so I'm opening it up. Any one of the panelists can start with this particular question, but please feel free to come off mute and share for the group.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having us with you today. I'm Pamela Perkins-Carr, and really, really happy to be here with you. In regard to your question, as far as the election results and what does that mean for Black children in particular in Georgia? I think that it means the status quo continues unless there is change. And unless there's an understanding of the real consequences of policies and laws that are in place today, that are currently in place. And then also an alternative voice to the rhetoric of fear-mongering and stereotyping of children in general within our classrooms. And so I think that until we really have that conversation of when school board meetings become places where you have parents and others who feel that it is necessary to protest against restorative justice or protest against teaching cultural lessons, culturally centric lessons that are factual in basis. I think that until we can come to grips with that, we have an uphill climb in ensuring that just and equitable opportunities in education for Black children in particular. And so I think that, yes, last night's results indicate that those arguments or that rhetoric is pervasive and that it has power. And we have to pay closer attention to that. And thank you.
No, thank you so much for your response and your thoughts to share. Also, just want to follow up on that. I think that your point about ensuring that we are aware of the power of our voice, but not just our voice, but the power that exists in many voices, and being mindful of that and the decisions that we make is important and is critical. And so I want to turn it over to another panelist to talk a little bit more about be it the election results, or if there's any thoughts that you want to share and follow up to Mrs. Carr's response.
I'd like to just share in response to what Ms. Khan stated a bit about access, right? Because I think the election reflected that there are huge swaths of the Black population that don't have access to voting. And we know that there was a significant ground game around suppressing the vote. And so I'm a former librarian. And so I believe access to not only literature, but access to information, right, is a critical piece of what we are experiencing in relationship to the outcome of the election in many respects. So I would just say that I hope going forward, I'm motivated to open up and expand access and to find avenues for expanding access to information. And also pushing, someone earlier was talking about controlling narratives, right? Really expanding the narrative as it relates to Black children, because I don't think that the issues that are important to Black families were really front and center in the ways in which they should have been. So I would just say that expanding our ground game to make access and the narrative broader to reflect what our real concerns are in relationship to Black children.
Yes, no, and I couldn't agree more. I think it is certainly what we don't know that places us in a great disadvantage when it comes to navigating spaces where these kinds of laws are being pushed forward, these kinds of policies and the subsequent discussions that are taking place. If you're not harnessing not just only the power of your voice, but the right information to be able to have these kinds of conversations, it makes it very challenging, the work that we do. And so I agree, having that both understanding of expanding our ground game, but also in the process of doing so, ensuring that we're increasing knowledge and information around the impact of what happens when you vote, what happens when you don't vote, when you're not engaged, and what happens when you are. So I know we can move on to the next question, but also wanted to still keep the space open if Callan, if you wanted to share or
I'm sorry, Dr. Johnson, I must, I apologize for interrupting, but we have one of our legislators here and she's raised her hand a couple of times. I want to give her space.
Oh, yes, sure.
So Representative Donna McLeod, please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you all for sending me this invite. At first, I didn't quite know what this was about, so I'm glad I got on. I am in Gwinnett County. I represent parts of Bethlehem, Decula, Lawrenceville, Grayson, and Loganville. One of the things I must say, you guys posed a couple of things regarding the budget. If you guys are looking for advocacy, please remember that the budget still has a 1985 formula. It is something that I've stood up for this entire session. In fact, I voted against the budget because it doesn't do what it needs to do for our schools. The formula was last done in 1985 in the Gwinnett County system that I live in. What Gwinnett County system looked like in 1985, it doesn't look like. Somebody's radio is on, somebody's needs to mute.
I'm looking to see who it is.
Yeah, I got it, you got it. So the budget, the 1985 budget is not doing what it needs to do, and there's no equity built in this budget for schools. So if you're looking to advocate, I had legislation, I think it was HB 71, in which I really pushed to have the formula redone, and it was just basically a pilot to take a small amount of thing to bring in equity into the process. So if you're looking for advocacy, I would ask you to push on legislators to really update this formula. It is not working. The other part of the budget is there's $140 million in the budget for private prisons. If you're looking for the school to prison pipeline connection, there you have it. You're not fully funding public schools, and you're basically funding private prisons. So as far as the election is concerned, as a person who sat in the Georgia legislative branch, it has been a difficult year, 2 years for us, with the trying to ban books, as well as trying to say this divisive concepts and all of that. It's sad because the current school superintendent reside over it, and he knew very well that there was no such things going on, but refused to speak up and say this was incredibly egregious. But he wanted to make sure that he did not offend the base of the party instead of protecting our children. So as far as I'm concerned with elections as it is, I think that a bigger presence of NBCDI at the state capitol, and really talking to every single legislator to let them know you are here, you are not backing down. Black children need to be at the forefront, and the families and the children that are in those families need to be put as priorities. And that means that every single legislator, white, Black, Republican, I don't care. You need to be there saying, we have an agenda. This is what we want. This is what we're seeing that's happening in our family. We do have mental health. Make sure that you also find out how you can use the resources of the mental health priority bill that we passed last session. And once again, this is, even though we were not successful statewide, it is important because if your voice is not at the Capitol, somebody else's voice is at the Capitol. And that's what we found. We had a hard time last session because here we are fighting, but we didn't see anyone else but the crazies that wanted to spread their stupidness and their empty barrel foolishness that I could not stand. But they were there. They took most of the oxygen out of the air when nobody else was there. And if NBCDI really want to make an impact, show up like they do. Show up at the committee meetings. Show up to each of the legislators. Ask for a meeting with legislators. Stop waiting for them to do stuff. You do it because you are organized And if you really care about Black children, stand up for them, stand up and make sure that the things that are priority for Black children are being heard in the halls of the Gold Dome.
Thank you so much, Representative McLeod. We're so happy that you joined us. I placed the legislation in the chat, and our fellows and our organization will continue to look at that particular bill as well. We are so thankful that you joined us and shared your voice today. Dr. Johnson, I'm turning it back over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Representative. In just hearing you speak and talk about what's needed, being visible and on the grounds of the Capitol is so important. Talking to your legislators, having meetings with them, discussing the issues that are pertinent and important and critical to you and your family and communities, especially when we think about Black children and families. So I couldn't agree more. I think that's the same strategy. And I know we've got other questions, but in some ways, I don't want to miss this moment of really affirming what you're saying, because those same kind of strategic activities of making sure that you're meeting, making sure that you're seen, making sure that you're heard, making sure that it's consistent, is the same thing I would say on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. Because you're right, the same individuals that are meeting on a daily basis to do the opposite of what it is that we wish to see, don't take days off. And so that is so important for us to keep the momentum going and to continue moving forward in our work and our advocacy. And so I would say one of the things that I think I'm very grateful for at BCDI is when we think about the work that we do. We know that the work that we do centers babies. And when I think about not just babies, I think about the preschool children they soon become, the teenagers they grow up to be, and the adults who walk among us navigating this wide, wondrous thing human existence is. And one thing that I think is so critical to this conversation is that, and I often share with policymakers in reminding them of their commitment, is that childhood is not an adventure we choose, but it is chosen by adults familiar and forever unknown through the experiences that they create for us. And so as we think about, families and, that families are essential for healthy growth and development. However, currently in Georgia, many children grow, live and play in homes where there are multiple factors of risk, such as residential mobility, things like unemployment, low parental education, or even large family size. And on average in Georgia, 46% of children ages birth through 8 live in homes with at least 2 risk factors, and 16% live with 3 or more. So given this current state, what Representative McLeod has shared, can we talk a little bit about what your thoughts are as it relates to an advocacy focus for next year? And so I know that the last questions, Pamela and Dr. Gardner spoke. So I'm going to point it at you, Kylan, and give you an opportunity to speak a little bit about advocacy.
Yes, thank you so much, Lee. And I love seeing you here in Georgia. Lee is from our neighboring state in Alabama, and I'm just always, it's such a pleasure to share space with you. What's really on my radar over the next year is Medicaid. And we know that Medicaid covers about 50% of births in Georgia. So 50% of our children are really affected by what happens with Medicaid. And during the public health emergency, all Medicaid terminations were stopped. So there's been significant growth of the Medicaid rolls, I think 40-ish% increase in Medicaid enrollment since the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. And over the next few months, we will see that public health emergency lifted, and there is going to be this redetermination of Medicaid. And that's, I think it's about 2.5 million Georgians will have their Medicaid, redetermined. So they will either be determined eligible or not eligible. And any of you have ever helped someone with a Medicaid application or been on Medicaid yourselves, you'll know how difficult the redetermination process is. There is a lot of drop off during redeterminations. And so our friends at GBPI estimate that about 540,000 Georgians will lose Medicaid over the next year. And so that's a lot of Georgians, a lot of children who are going to be losing their health coverage. And there's a lot of ways that we've already started thinking about, Medicaid. Yes, Ife, most of them are Black and Brown children. And so there are a lot of ways that we started thinking about how do we grow the number, how do we support access to Medicaid. So the pregnancy Medicaid extension went into effect on November 1st. Express lane eligibility, which looks at SNAP determinations to automatically enroll children in Medicaid. But there are some other things that we're looking at. Continuous Medicaid eligibility for the first 3 years of life is on my sort of advocacy bucket list or, future. And then we will also really need to, I think, keep an eye on the new waiver plan that the Kemp administration has been advocating for, that a federal judge just decided was going to be implemented. And this waiver plan has work requirements for adults, which we know is a really big barrier to a lot of adults and is going to cause all sorts of administrative headaches. So that's sort of what I'm looking at and what I think we should all really be considering looking at.
Thank you, Callan. I want to make sure that I give Ms. Tillman an opportunity to respond to either your point around health outcomes related to Medicaid or any other follow-up thoughts to some of the previous responses that we shared.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me today. Our focus is more on building more restorative discipline systems as opposed to the punitive ones, rolling back or at least mitigating the effects of the divisive concepts, ensuring that our youngest learners are not suspended out of school, and that we are doing other supports and also looking at the school as opposed to always pathologizing the child. When you put them in toxic environments, those are the types of results. They're reacting to the environment. So expanding the existing legislation that's there to really look at what is the school climate. My organization was responsible for getting student discipline included in the statewide school climate indicator. Of course, the implementation wasn't what we hoped. However, just getting that in there and keeping it there is important, right? So we have to look at what the school climate is and where are we placing our babies. So I tend to push advocacy around that, as well as authentic parent engagement, creating spaces for families to really engage. We find that oftentimes schools say that parents aren't involved, but you can't hold the door closed while you say, oh, if parents don't come. Well, it needs to be a welcoming environment. So we will be supporting things that do that.
Yes, no, thank you so much for sharing. I also, when I think about keep holding the door open, have all these good memories of watching my nephew growing up, trying to open a door at 2 years old, trying to push the door open and kind of looking up at his uncle like, hey, you are big enough to open this door. So I'm gonna need you to do it, you know. And I think when I think about the work that we do on behalf of Black children and families, in some ways, that's what they're counting on for us to be able to not only just open the door, but keep it open, as well as standing in the gap. And so I think the work you're doing is incredibly important. And the conversation around advocacy related to Medicaid cannot be overstated, knowing how many of our Black and brown babies are Medicaid eligible, but also we find that the challenge becomes with who's in the decision-making seat around Medicaid expansion and whatnot. And so I did want to open up for the next question to our panelists. As we kind of think, because earlier there was a discussion around, you know, some of the educational settings that our Black children are navigating. And for many, you know, the path to higher educational attainment starts, as we know, with early childhood education. And there is strong evidence that early childhood education leads not only to higher educational attainment in later years, but also contributes to better health outcomes and promotes health equity. Children who attend, as research shows, early childhood education typically have reduced special education use, teen births and crime, as well as improved standardized test scores and increased high school graduation. Now, as someone whose background is in public health, it's a great feeling to know that as part of Healthy People 2030, there was a goal to increase the proportion of children who participate in high quality early childhood education programs. So as you think about the work that you do, share a little bit about what you think, what should Georgia do to increase equitable access, ability to high quality early care and learning for all children, including Black children. And I will start with Dr. Gardner.
Okay, sure. So because I work with literacy and reading, I would say that would be a critical place to start. You know, there are 126 counties in Georgia, and I think several years ago, there was a huge grant that the Georgia Department of Education obtained with the focus of trying to improve opportunities for access to reading and literacy, early reading and literacy. And I think it went very swiftly, right, in terms of the money, in terms of trying to identify supports. And I would just say, I think we have to continually revisit it, right? I think there are these sort of small stop gaps to address these issues. And then when the money goes away, you know, so to do the, you know, ideas, but I think it is something that is relentless that we have to continually talk about. Just to sort of revert just very briefly to the earlier question and with regard to policy, there's a lot happening in Georgia with regard to dyslexia, the dyslexia law, and conversations about structured literacy and how we teach literacy. And so I just think that should be part of a policy agenda all the time, because if you look at the data around reading and Black children, again, statistically, you know, we're not faring very well. But I also want to just say, before I hand the baton off to someone else, that we have to create motivating context for reading. And that is, you know, creating a joy around it. Reading is such a beautiful and fun thing. And if we don't introduce it that way to children, we're going to lose them before we even, you know, they even get started with it. So I just think really finding context, and that's very difficult in a time when libraries all over the state are shortening their hours and you know, letting go librarians. And so that's part of the conversation too, I think, really joining with our other public entities to help reading become accessible for all children and families.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gardner. It looks like, I want to say, Ms. Karn, did it look like you were going to say something to that question? Did you have something to share?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. You have keen eyes. I guess
do.
the educator that you are.
The educator that I am. Yes.
Nobody gets anything by you, right? No, yes, I just wanted to speak to that part about, I think it was Representative McLeod who raised the issue of the budget. And so we have not dealt with poverty in Georgia. And so for our children to actually get a start, we actually have to address the economic well-being of children and families in Georgia. We also know through the Kids Count book, I think the 2022 data showed that more than half of our 3 and 4-year-olds are not in school. So we actually have to expand access, which goes back to the budget and making those things, making access available. We have to fund what we want to see, right? I know that Reverend Barber's always says that, you know, the budget is a moral document. And I know we've heard that from so many grassroots through the grassroots community. And so it speaks to where you want to go and who you want to see in those spaces. So if we continue to allow poverty to be such a burden in our communities, especially in our Black communities and communities of color, and in our rural communities where we have a vast poor white community in our rural communities. So if we want to see change in those spaces, if we want better outcomes in education for our children, especially at the beginning, as you said, we have to fund it. We have to stop saying, I don't want to pay taxes. You know, that just shouldn't come out of our mouths. So if we want better, now, if we don't want better, then feel free to say those things, but don't say those things and vote for those things and expect better to happen for those who are burdened in poverty. So I think we have to start at the beginning and have that, again, go back to speaking truth to power, having those real conversations, helping our communities understand as well, because access to information, as Dr. Gardner said, is just another burden, lack of access. And so for our children to do better, we have to build a better foundation, and we have to put in place structures in which they can thrive. And those structures need to be funded.
Thank you so much for your feedback and your thoughts on this. I see that Representative McLeod has her hand up and want to give her an opportunity to speak again as well.
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to say something about the budget, and I want to kind of explain quickly so that people can kind of express this going forward. So the budget, Georgia budget is $30 billion with a B, 30 billion. We also get $27 billion from the federal government. But of that 30 billion, 76% of that 30 billion comes directly from income and sales tax. So that's us, all of us. Another 12% comes from fees. So actually totaling 88% coming from us. The last 12% comes from businesses, in which 280,000 businesses do not pay any federal, any sales, any income tax. So you're talking about the bulk of our budget being from us. Again, the largest part of the budget that we pay is in the school system, and it's not allocated properly. What I say to people is, you ought to be demanding a return on investment. You're making an investment. You're not asking for anything for free. You're paying for stuff, and government should provide a service to the people who pay taxes. Businesses work separately. Businesses will provide a product or service. They will mark up that product or service to make a profit. This is not how government is supposed to work. And asking for a return on investment is our responsibility. and our duty to ourselves and the people that are around us. That's why knowledge is so powerful, but the vote is so powerful, all of us, because we impact each other with the vote. And that's why I need people to understand how the budget works, where the monies are all allocated. Stop letting people tell you that you shouldn't expect anything and that you're dependent on something. You're not dependent on anything. You're paying for it. And sometimes some of us are in a better place at some times and might need, and some of us might be in a lesser place at some time and might need more of help from the system. But it's a system that we all decide that we're going to contribute to, because we know everything we can't pay to make a profit. You do not want to drive on a road only for profit, because you will be, it is called a toll road if it's for profit. So we collectively say we want to be together on certain things. Education is our biggest one that we said we want to do it, and we're still not doing it right. So I just wanted to bring that point in about budget. And yes, it is a moral document. It's a document that tells us what our priorities are. So it does matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative. I know I was like, I'm unmuting and wanting to clap all at the same time. But Dr. Gardner, you got that covered there. So I'll turn it to you.
No, I was trying to, work all of my emojis at once because, right, that was so informational and impactful. And the reason why I asked for an infographic, thank you, Caitlin, is because, again, I want to go back to that point about access, right? So if we're talking about parents and families who are working class, right, or who are working poor, that document is a wonderful document overall, but not so much for them, right? Not so much for working class families who are busy, right? Who don't have a lot of time. So I'm just wondering what kind of ways, an organization like BCDI or partnering with other organizations can make this kind of information more accessible. Again, so right, when we talk about access, sometimes, right, you have a government entity that says it's right there, it's in that 800-page document, right? That's not necessarily accessible to the kinds of constituents who we may need to get busy and cause hear their voices, right? So I just want to put that out there. Again, I'm just going back to what it means to be a public servant of information as a librarian. I know it's there, that's great, but it's not as accessible to, say, my mother. When my mother worked at the phone company, she would have never had time to read a document like that.
Yes, no, so I would say, and again, to affirm, because I know that we are coming up on time and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, to affirm something that you said and something that Representative McCoy said. It is my belief that destiny moves at the speed of decision, but decisions are determined by priorities. And so when we think about these priorities that when you talk about the budget and you think about what are the kinds of opportunities that exist, in the same way that you talk about what kind of information is needed, how can it be shared, how can it be easily shared, I want to invite those of you to share in the chat. If you have any strategies or lessons that you would like to share, so that other people can learn from what has been successful for you. Has it been in the form of, creating one-pagers? Has it been in not necessarily being the lead on something and partnering with someone else? So I invite you to do two things. One, you can feel free to share in the chat any kind of strategies related to sharing information, sharing information quickly and succinctly. But also the other question that I really wanted to get to and leave you all with is if you had a magic pen and you could write an impactful public policy, what would it be and why? And so again, so the chat box, I'm hoping that it is lit up with thoughts about that, but I want to drop that as a question, as a reflection question, but also to invite you all to share if you so feel in the chat. And I will just say, this has been an incredible opportunity to meet with you, to hold this space with all of you. And again, one of the things that I will say is that when I asked the question earlier about what does a just and equitable future look like for Black children, there are many answers, you know, I'm sure that we all can find to that question. But one thing that I will share in the way that we are envisioning it at the national level is that we see it as a world where every Black child is born at a healthy weight, where every Black child attends a school or participates in an early care and education experience that affirms and expands them, where every Black child can enjoy meals and vegetables, where they can hang out on a safe and appropriate internet, where they have books and toys that reflect who they are and who they can be, where they can breathe clean air and drink clean water, where they can be seen as a child, and where they can live and play in a safe community. Now, these are outcomes that motivate the work of NBCDI, and I have a strong feeling that together, this too will be an opportunity for us to work and see these visions become a reality. So I'm going to turn this back over to Dr. Lewis. Thank you, Dr. Thornton, for the opportunity to share this space with your friends and colleagues, but also these incredible policy leaders that are on this meeting today. So thank you for the honor of sharing time and space with all of you. And I will turn it over to Dr. Lewis.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson and the panel. We are so appreciative of your time today. We know that everyone has a busy schedule, but here's the thing, our children, our families, you all, they need us to do this deep work. You know, I know you're like me, you're on a lot of meetings, we're at different events. Our children and our families need for us to show up, as our representative said today, and actually do the deep work. You know, yes, encouraging people to vote. We have to do that all year long. You need to check your status all year long, but also be involved in what's happening in your community. You guys know what they say, if you're not at the table, you're on the what? You're on the menu. So making sure we're not just reacting to policy, that we are being in front of it and being proactive. I love that we have, I only saw one legislator. You guys correct me if I'm wrong. I only saw one legislator here. Here's the thing, what we do at BCDI-Atlanta. We invite them all. Democrats, Republicans, Independents, every legislator in Georgia gets an invite to our policy events. Look who showed up. And that's what we say to people when you go to polls. Remember who you're seeing in your different events and in your community. Who are you actually seeing? What are they doing? So I'm going to stop there and get off that soapbox. Again, thank you for coming. I have some updates for you guys. I'll also in events. I also want you to know that the recording, the slides, all the links will be sent to you in a follow-up email. Our team will gather all that together and put it in a nice format for you so you can click on all of those links and information that was shared. But I also want to make sure you know yourself how you can save the chat. So if you click on the chat and you click on the three dots over to the right after the emotions, after the reactions, there are three dots there that you can click on when you open the chat, and you can actually save the chat yourself. Okay, so some of you guys probably want to go to those links right now. So go ahead and save the chat, the three dots after you click on the chat over to the right. And of course, we'll have the links to follow up with you. Thank you to our panelists, everyone who was on from our community, who shared information, who shared links that will support the work that we're doing. You can go to our policy page. Our policy page shows you what BCDI-Atlanta is currently focusing on. And we're taking this information from today to help us to determine our legislative actions, our legislative agenda for 2023. And this is how we engage with our legislators. So you can also be a part of our continual work throughout the year. We don't just wait till election day, guys. We don't just wait until the legislative session. We're working all year around, right? All year round. So our next quarterly affiliate meeting is in January. We just had one last month. So next in January, after the holidays, we'll have our winter meeting. And then we have one in April, that's our spring meeting. Our summer meeting is July 11th. And every year in October, we have our annual business meeting, which is members only. And this is where we take care of business. We vote on on next board members and other business that you may want to learn about the organization, budget, etc. So that's the business meeting at 5 o'clock. And then we have our quarterly affiliate meeting right after that, after a break at 6:30. So those are our dates for 2023. You can go, next slide, please, to our calendar on our website, and we'll have that link in the chat for you shortly. So you can see our calendar, which is there through 2023. How else can you get involved? You can become a member. So when you become a member, and Monique or someone, if you guys will get that link in the chat. When you become a member, you're not only a member of a local affiliate, you are a member of the national organization. And Dr. Lee Johnson, he is at the national office. So you become a member of NBCDI as well as BCDI-Atlanta if you choose our affiliate. But here's the great thing. You can choose any affiliate. There are 24 affiliates around the nation. Of course, we'd love for you to choose Atlanta, but for those of you all who are on from different places, please know there are different affiliates around the nation, but you're a member of national and you select your affiliate. So please become a member of NBCDI and one of its affiliates. And again, we'd love to welcome you here in Atlanta. This is a professional organization. There's student membership, there's organization membership, there's regular membership. We would love to have you engaged nationally and locally. Next slide, please. Of course, none of us can do what we do without funding. You heard that come up a number of times today in our event. So there are a number of ways that you can support our work throughout the year. PayPal, donor box, we use Amazon Smile when you order. Instead of going to Amazon.com, go to smile.amazon.com, and you're not actually donating from your pocket. Amazon donates to us on your behalf. So that is a nonprofit arm of Amazon. If you go to Amazon Smile, when you place your orders on Amazon, they send funding to us. You can use Zelle at whatever bank where you bank and send money to us that way. And we also have Cash App. So if you go to our donate page, which should be in the chat, that will allow you to support the work that we do in our communities throughout the year. Next slide, please. So our events page, this is where you can see on our events page, usually we have the next events that are coming up, say the date, so you can go ahead and mark those on your calendar. But what's also on that page is our calendar link where you can have our Google Calendar access for the remainder of, again, this year and next year. So you can constantly see what happens and what we're doing with BCDI-Atlanta. So you can go straight to the calendar page or you can access it on events and see what we have coming up, because we know after today, you want to be engaged throughout the year. So that's the way to do it. See our upcoming events. Let me share a few that are coming up that are key with you. Next slide. Again, January 10th, go ahead and mark your calendar so we can see you at our quarterly affiliate meeting. It is virtual so that we can engage everyone. So please mark that on your calendar, and you can actually go online now and register and save that to your calendar. Advocacy Day at the Capitol. So we'll get together with our team, our fellows as well, and we'll pull together our legislative agenda for 2023. And Advocacy at the Capitol, we will have legislators there as well, and we will focus on the legislation that we are supporting and promoting for Black children and families. So mark this date on your calendar, February 8th, 2023, starting at 11. Please join us for our summit. This is our largest event of the year. It's our annual conference in Atlanta. So it's our 4th annual Culturally Responsive Early Education and Care Summit. We are focusing on literacy of young children, family engagement, early care and education, and also school transition. Those are our 4 tracks. We'll have a panel this year that NBCDI is supporting. We invite you all to mark this date on your calendar and join us for our summit. Also, you can sponsor. The link is also on our events page. We thank you in advance. This is our top event of the year, and everyone leaves with culturally responsive materials for young children. I hope you've been tweeting, posting, pinning today. If you haven't, because I know you've been strongly listening, make a note to share your quotes, anything someone said today, links that were important to you, share that on social media. Make sure you tag us, BCDI-Atlanta, and hashtag Black Children Count, because that's how we tag all of our policy initiatives, and everyone can keep up and categorize that way. So Black Children Count is our hashtag that we use for policy. You can see what we've done and discussed in the past, and we look forward to seeing what you guys are sharing from today. Again, thank you all for coming. It is 3:02. We are adjourning, and we will see you virtually and hopefully in person too. Have a great rest of your day and week. Thank you, team, for such a great job. And thank you again to our panelists and our moderator. You guys are amazing. Have a great day.
Thank you. Dr. Natasha, you want to take a picture? Stop sharing.
Okay. Oh, we're going to take, numbers are going in.
Okay, that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, hey. Hello there.
Yeah, I had to go get him off the bus.
Yes. No, hey, that's life.
My grandson, Grayson.
That's real life. Hello, Grayson.
I love it. Yes. Hey, Grayson. I love it.
Good to see you. Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Guys. Keep up the work. We need this. Please, please be advocates at the Capitol. Let your voice be heard in that Gold Dome.
Yes.
That's where we lose a lot of time, was when we seem to be, we don't have any other persons talking, and they've coordinated and they've organized. We need to be organized.
Definitely. We look forward to you in person again. Yes, thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey, Maisa.
Hey, Dr. Bisa. Hi, Daphne. How you guys doing? Great event. Great event. I love it. Love it. Love it. Love it.
Thank you. I saw Brianna and Dawn were going to join, but I think they had another event when we changed the date.
Yeah, they did. They did. And Dawn was trying to join at the end, but I think she couldn't get in because it was towards the end, but it's okay.
Okay.
I'll tell her all about it.
Great. Will you be in NYC next week?
Yes.
Okay. I see you there.
All right. See you there. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Jocelyn, too, for joining us. Dr. Natasha and Daphne. I think it was great. What do y'all think?
I thought it was Dr. Natasha. Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Okay. I thought it went real good. I thought, we were packed for time, but everybody was engaged.
Yeah.
But you stop recording.